Hi, I am Hafiz, and this is We Are Dads Too, a podcast for fathers by fathers. Each week, we'll have conversations about different aspects of fathering. We will also be speaking with experts to get their opinions. So, with us today is Dr. Chan Yeow, who is a senior consultant at Tan Tock Seng Hospital and director of the Tan Tock Seng Hospital Home Ventilation and Respiratory Support Service. Wow, that's a mouthful. He is also a father of a 16-year-old boy. Good morning, Dr. Chan.
Good morning, Hafiz. Thank you for having me here.
Yes, it's really
Good morning,
great to have a doctor in the house.
You wouldn't want to see me.
I feel healthy this morning.
Yes.
Okay, today we have a very interesting topic. The topic we call Who Should Care? So, we will not be talking so much about fathering today, but more importantly, about who should take care of the elderly. I think this issue is about when we have children, we have family, we should not forget that we also have parents, and usually elderly parents they still need our help. And I think to juggle between our own family and the people that have taken care of us when we were young is very important. So why we have a doctor in the house today in this topic? Because Dr. Chan is a very special doctor because he has this passion on this topic of taking care of the elderly. So maybe you introduce yourself a bit more, Dr. Chan.
Thank
And
you,
what you do?
Hafiz.
Yeah.
Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
The sound's okay. Okay, good. So I started out as an anesthesiologist. I qualified in 1994, and then I completed my anesthesia training in 2003. After that, I branched into intensive care. So as you know from the recent COVID crisis, in intensive care, we use machines to resuscitate people, reverse their organ pathology, and keep them alive. And therefore, in intensive care, one of the things that we face is what do you do with people who survive the acute illness for 1 week or 1 month, but they are left dependent on machines. Two examples from overseas that may that people may be able to relate to. One is Professor Stephen Hawking, who is a professor of astrophysics in UK, and he had motor neuron disease. So he actually was using a breathing machine with a breathing tube for several decades, and he managed to stay alive. He used an interface for him to somehow communicate his thoughts, either via text or verbally, and therefore he was able to continue writing books, giving lectures, and meeting people. Another example might be Christopher Reeves. Those who from our generation will know him as Superman. And he had an accident where he had a cervical cord injury, and he was also on a ventilator. So our story goes back to 2008 when we had, at that time, 3 patients in our ICU with cervical cord injury, and they were breathing machine dependent. And somehow circumstances were such that at that time, instead of giving up and conceding that we are a third world country and we can't keep them alive, we somehow managed to engineer their return home. So the first patient actually survived till 2015, and that was the birth of our home ventilation and respiratory support service. So we started out as a ICU outreach, and we jumped over so many categories of care to be involved in home care directly. So currently, after 12 years, we are still a pilot program, but we're grateful to Ministry of Health for their continued support. We now have more than 150 patients at home, depending on machines. And so our work lets us see the full dimension of human life, the sufferings, as well as the joys that can be hidden amidst the sufferings. We also see the changing dynamics in families and also societal pressures, economic pressures, changes that happen due to expectations, changes that happen due to certain provisions that are made. And to date, I think the firm conclusion of my team is still that our job is not to keep patients alive forever, but to help them to live each day well. And for that to happen, the best place is still in a loving environment, which means that someone who loves them and knows them looks after them. And often this will be the children, the grandchildren, or the spouse. And in rare cases, might be cousins, might be friends. And so it is our team's wish that we help to contribute a little drop to the whole sea of Singapore to try to change the culture to a culture of care. That Singaporeans learn how to care, first of all, for your immediate loved ones, but also maybe your extended family and your neighbors and friends. Okay, I think I've spoken too much.
Well, I caught a word that you said, and that is to change the culture to a culture of care. Why do you think there's a need to do that? Are you implying that currently there isn't this culture of care in Singapore?
Okay, I think we are all in that generation where when we were growing up, it was a stigma if our parents were sent to a nursing home. At the time, it would have been thought in the Asian context very unfilial if you dump your parents in a nursing home. I think in the last 20 years, the pendulum has swung the opposite direction. So now nursing homes are actually not cheap. They are fairly expensive, especially if you are not subsidized. You pay a few $1,000s for them. Nursing homes are thought to be professional. So a lot of lay people feel that, okay, I'm only, I'm a businessman, I'm a hawker, I'm an engineer. I don't know how to look after my spouse or my mom or my dad. So my dad or mom will be in better hands in a professional environment. But what we don't realize is that there are a lot of systemic pressures within nursing homes, because ultimately, whether they are run by charity or by commercial entities, there are all these logistic, economic, manpower constraints. And therefore, while the care is professional, only the most exceptional places have care that is also loving. Okay, most other places are professional, efficient, and correct. And in Singapore, our government has been very good. So during the beginning of the pandemic, there was a great effort to protect our nursing home dwellers. But if you take reference from overseas, whether it's Belgium, United States, you see that nursing home residents were the first to suffer and suffer grievously when the pandemic happened, because they became the forgotten people. So I think the idea of professionals looking after our elderly disabled is a fallacy. In fact, in Auckland, in New Zealand, they did a study where they got family members who were looking after their loved ones and doctors, nurses, and therapists, and they subjected them to some tests, and they found that in certain aspects, the family members were superior to the doctors, nurses, and therapists, primarily because imagine if I'm a doctor, I may see such a disabled patient 3 times a week or 5 times a week for 1 hour at a time. But the family member sees that patient for 8 hours or 12 hours a day, every day, 365 days. So after a while, they become the experts in the care needs of their loved ones. And therefore, I think this is something that some of our patients' families have realized. And some of the patients, not some, but many of my home ventilated patients, before they go home, when they're in the ICU, they all fear going home. But after they've been home for 6 months, they fear coming back to hospital, because they say, hey, when I'm in hospital, I'm looked after by strangers. They don't know what I need. They don't know that when I do this, it means I'm communicating this. So to the hospital team, a lot of patients are poorly communicative or cognitively impaired. That's because they haven't figured out how to reach out and bridge to the patient. Yeah. Whereas at home, they are understood and they are
trying
loved.
to decode what they're trying to say.
Yes. Sometimes it may not be verbal. So it might be with gestures. It might be with all sorts of other communication tools. So because of that, I am a strong believer that we can do more to make self-help and mutual help possible. The other aspect that I see, of course, is that at home, a lot of families default to foreign domestic workers. And we all read the very tragic cases where either foreign domestic workers commit suicide or abuse or run away. And I think this reflects the reality that foreign domestic workers did not come to Singapore expecting to provide care. They may or may not have received adequate training, and there may or may not be enough manpower protection for their living conditions, despite the best of intentions of government and the maid agencies. And therefore, within our cohort, because our patients are very complex, we insist that patients, family members, or a responsible adult take full responsibility, even if part of the care is passed over to the foreign domestic worker. That means there's a responsible adult who understands, who knows, and who will make the decisions. And preferably this adult also dirties his hands and do some of the work and not just stand there like the Stanford Raffles, and supervise only.
I catch the word
Yeah,
bridge
I think
that you said just
Singaporeans
now. And I think what you are doing is filling up a gap. I think the gap is both ways, between the love and tender care that the family can give versus the professional care that people who are trained can give. It's always this dilemma of choosing either or, it seems. But I think you are doing a good work in equipping, laymen like us who may not be equipped with taking care of elderly or even disabled people, and giving us that information, knowledge, and training, such that we can have both, not either or. Because I also used to take care of my mom. The story goes such that my brother was taking care because he had a maid. So the maid really helped, in ensuring that, because both of them go to work, husband and wife. So the maid takes care of the safety and so on. But sometimes we are very dependent on the maid, expect the maid to do everything, while we know actually they are not trained at all when it comes to elderly care. So when the maid so-called had to go back to the country, I had a maid, so it was our mother came to us, all right, and I experienced it was not easy, because really taking care of a baby, is one. It's not the same as taking care of an elderly person, because although you think it's similar, like when you to change diapers, but for example, a baby is light and elderly is heavy, and a baby
Yes.
usually they don't react like an elderly, and if an elderly person usually they're more sensitive, and we don't, especially those who are, for example, having stroke, they cannot move much, and even if they cannot speak, even if, for example, dementia is even make it worse. So these are the things I thought. I was talking about the gap that you are bridging, which is excellent.
So I think in the past there was also.
So Dr. Chen, what do you think are the reasons?
Sorry, Parkson, can you repeat
Go
your
ahead.
question? Okay, so I think in the past there
what do you
was
think are
also
some reasons? Okay. I think there's a lag in my Wi-Fi here. That's why it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. In the past, the doctors and nurses and therapists may have been lacking in willingness to impart some of these knowledge and skills because of lack of trust of the loved ones, of family members and caregivers. But I think also, again, taking reference from COVID, during this pandemic, people realized that you cannot depend on plan A all the time. You must have a backup plan B. So last night I was attending a webinar from UK, and they talked about how within a space of 3 months, they created, the physiotherapists, speech therapists, nurses created virtual training platforms for family members. Because in the UK, during the COVID crisis, the home care nurses and doctors were all shunted to acute care to treat the hospitalized, and all the home provision services were stopped. So there were no home visits. Imagine you've got maybe a few tens of thousands of disabled elderly living at home. So what some of these teams did was that they quickly, using a mannequin, using volunteers, they quickly made videos of the caregiving procedures. They gave online PowerPoint lectures about some of the aspects of care that need to be done. And these were pushed out within a space of months. Actually, we had the same experience. We first did our 14 YouTube videos on tracheostomy and ventilatory care 3 years ago because we realized the gap that is needed and that the patients and family, they need to have a background knowledge. So you need to teach them almost as if they are going to be a nurse or a therapist or a doctor. You need to teach them. You cannot say that I hold the knowledge back. You just listen to me, I'm the doctor. You have to actually share your knowledge. The second thing is that people will forget. So you tell them A, B, and C. Then when they do, it becomes C, B, and A. So they need some accessible aid memoir. So the first old tech aid memoir that we used was we asked them to write down or draw and laminate and stick on the wall. And we still do that. That is a very helpful thing for emergency drills and for emergency phone numbers. But we realized that we can leverage on technology. So we developed an app. And in the app, there's a booklet, there are videos, there are Q&A, and so on. Right? So I think ours is the tip of the iceberg because we look after patients who have the highest care needs. But there are a lot of other material that can be pushed out, that can be made available. Currently, for example, if a patient asks me, how do I give this medication to my dad through a tube? Then I will say, why don't you look up Mayo Clinic or Harvard? And then they will have this website that is for the caregiver. Why is that to stop Tan Tock Seng or Singapore General Hospital or Parkway Hospitals from producing more of these materials? So I think we are doing it, and all the different hospitals, the different departments are beginning to churn out materials that are more accessible. And the next challenge will be to make these available to people of different educational standards, maybe translated into different languages or even into, I suppose not many people need to communicate in dialect these days. So I suppose the 4 official languages are good enough.
So besides training, what other reasons are there for family members being unwilling to be involved in the caregiving of their elderly, especially those who are very, very, very sick?
Okay, I think so. The first reason, which is I alluded to, is fear that arises from ignorance. So training and having educational material will take care of that. The second might be unwillingness to change plans. So all of us have our 8 hours or 10 hours or 12 hours of professional work, depending on which line you are in. And we also have our perceived needs for recreation. Our children have a full program. So many parents are actually full-time chauffeurs. You drive your kid from enrichment to enrichment, from all sorts of activities. So the weekly routine for most families is very tight. And actually to even help your helper, that means to be there for your loved one, to offload your helper for 1 or 2 hours, requires a conscious decision to schedule that, to change your plans. And I think a lot of families may or may not have been able to make that jump. So I think the ones that I see are very happy are the ones where the loved ones are balanced. They still keep their lifestyle, their work, their recreation, but they have learned how to provide care. And yet they don't burn out because they are not immersed in the care 24/7, because none of us can do 2 full-time jobs. And speaking about this, I think the current COVID work from home is a dangerous situation because a parent or a caregiver may really now be having 2 or 3 full-time jobs. You might be working full-time and supervising your kids on an online learn from home. And then you might also be doing full-time looking after your loved ones because you are there and your helper somehow maybe relaxed. So I think these are challenges that come with our modern society, the demands of modern society. Employers will always want the most from their employees. So I think government and civic society as a whole needs to put the expectation that all of us are not just workers, but we are also spouses, parents, and children, and that looking after our loved ones ultimately is a duty and it's also a good for society. So I think we need to change the social mindset very much.
Mm.
I would like to
Wow.
see urgent family care leave being more available. Maybe, I don't know, it's like now we have a parenting leave, but can we also have urgent family care leave for parents who suddenly fall sick or spouse who suddenly fall sick?
That's a very good idea. I think that would be really helpful for instead of using the annual leave. So there's childcare leave, and then there's also urgent family care leave. I also read a study. I think this came out of the U.S., one of the universities in the U.S. that says that adult children who give care to their elderly parents, um, as well as parents who give care to their children who are chronically sick or with certain special needs, uh, it takes a toll on their own physical health, and it can, in some cases or many cases, even shorten their lives by as much as number of years. Have you come across such a study?
I wouldn't I wouldn't doubt that at all. In fact, in our cohort, what we do is every year we do a little very informal survey of the satisfaction of life of both our patients and the immediate caregiver. Immediate caregiver being a family member. And what we consistently find is that for more than 95% of our patients, they are like 60% satisfied with life. So if 5 is supremely happy, 1 is very miserable, most of my patients will score about 3, 2.5 to 3. We ask a battery of like 15 questions and we aggregate the score. So the predominant average, the mode is 3 for the for the patients. But for the family members, the predominant mode is about 2. That means the most common average is 2 out of 5. And the reasons given would be poor sleep quality, physical exhaustion, anxiety about finances. So again, now we come to other dimensions. So I think like physical exhaustion, poor sleep quality come directly with caregiving. Okay, so even if they have a helper, sometimes when the loved one wake up in the middle of the night, or like, those who are elderly demented, they have total reversal of sleep-wake cycle and they'll be pacing up and down the house or knocking on the bed rail in the night. The sleep quality does drop. The question then would be, is this something that we can tolerate as a family? Is this something that as a society we will tolerate? Knowing that all of us, I'm a Christian, but taking reference on Buddhism is a big religion in Singapore, right? So it said that we will all suffer. It is normal to be born, to grow old, to fall sick, and to die. So the grow old, fall sick are 2 phases in life. So if it happens to ourselves, we suffer. If it happens to our loved ones, are we prepared to tolerate and put up with it and make arrangements or changes in our life to cope with that? Then as bigger society, are we prepared to support each other in this? So I think the question would be, in the last century, we have seen the conflict between a planned socialist economy, the communist states, then the very capitalist, the very liberal, go for profit. Everything is for profit and shareholder. I think somewhere a third and a higher middle would be better. It's a society where everyone has got your needs fulfilled, but we also care for each other, and then we give and take. And that means, in practical terms, that the way we are taxed, the way we pay certain insurance policies will have to change. Because currently everything is based upon either a totally planned thing which government mandates, or if it's by private insurance companies, it's all from a profit motive. Okay, but how do you then, as our society ages, more and more of us will be old, semi-disabled, in need of care. How do we look after ourselves without burdening the younger generation? I mean, when we use words like burdening, it's very painful. It means that we are seeing ourselves as parasites, after you have contributed maybe 50, 60, 70 years. So how do you be a caring society? I think it doesn't just stop at the mouth. It has to start with the wallet, start with our time. I think that's a dialogue that I would like to see happening more in society in Singapore.
Mm. Yeah, and just like, people say it takes a village to raise a child, I think when it comes to the elderly, maybe the same applies. It takes a village to care for an elderly, especially one who is sick, so this doesn't rest on one person. For example, I hear lots of stories where, an elderly parent who is, having some chronic illness, has maybe 3 children, but the care of this elderly parent falls on just one of the children, So I think that's quite heavy. I mean, maybe the others have legitimate reasons, but maybe they need to be a bit more creative to find ways to support each other. Maybe the parent can live with one of the children, but the other 2 support in other ways, So yeah, I think maybe that's the spirit, the kampong spirit that we can revive in this context.
So on this, I think our nuclear families are not helping. Okay, so if I'm the doctor and let's say I meet such a patient with 3 children and we know that only one of them is trustworthy, then it is very normal for the healthcare team to load that one trustworthy person with all the responsibility. The other 2 go off scot-free. And then I think there are some provisions in law where you can force your children to look after you, pay money and all that, but it's
talking about
unpleasant.
the Maintenance of Parents Act, yeah?
Correct, but it's unpleasant, and I think very few families actually resort to that. So the one who takes out responsibility feels very burdened and tired and resentful after a while. So I suppose in the healthcare setting, maybe the doctors, social workers, and nurses need to be more mindful about this. But in greater society, maybe like in the churches, in the mosques, there'll be preaching and discussion about these aspects also. Being aware that we all have to play a part within our families. First, take care of our families, then we can come together and talk about creating a better society and so on. Schools, I would like to see schools. Currently, you see that there are kids who will go and do volunteer work. They do it because they need to get CCA points. They need to get a beautiful testimonial so that they can go to a good university. That is a good start. But I'd like to see caregiving being embedded, and then maybe more creative ideas about how we can get teenagers and young adults to participate in some of this. And I think we see that teenagers and young adults, many of them are generous and very upright. They have got good hearts. So we should not allow them to become cynical and tired, after a while, but we should find ways to encourage their generosity. I think let me sell Koyok for the government. Singapore Ministry of Health is interested in setting up a Singapore Healthcare Corps. So the idea being that we will mobilize a fraction of the Singapore population to be care capable, both within your own homes to look after your loved ones, and then when there's a civil emergency, a pandemic, a mass casualty, we can help each other. So the analogy being currently there are CPR providers, and then, on your phone, you can respond as a first responder. So I think, the next logical step I see is to cooperate with secondary schools, polytechnics, ITEs, and universities to embed this culture among our young people. And I would like to see that parents no longer say, hey, okay, one trend I see when I visit my patients is that teenagers are either studying away at enrichment or they are playing at the game station. And the reason that the parents who are in their 50s, who are looking after their 70s, disabled or elderly loved one, is that the teenagers are already very stressed. So the parents themselves consciously shield the teenagers from care. I think that is unfortunate because you are not allowing them to experience the joy and the hardship, but also the joy that comes through the hardship of caring for your loved ones. So I would like to see a societal shift in this, and see that doing a bit of care, just like doing housework, is legitimate part of growing up.
Yeah, so you did mention, I mean, Parkson did mention about it takes a village to raise a kid and also now to take care of the elderly. And I think I remember when I was young, there were a lot of these visit of to the old folks' home. It's like, every other year you have to do that. I don't see it now. I'm not saying that it is not good, but I think the point is to have a multi-prong, right? I mean, from the family, I mean, we have to show good example. I mean, we make decisions whether to take care of our own self, by own self, our elderly, or we send them to an institution. We have to explain it and discuss it with the kids as well, not just our decision. And decision becomes a family decision. Secondly, I think the schools has to be involved. I think it's not just about academic and performance. I think schools are today are also doing a lot to imbibe and instill character building, and to look into a more specific and education programs, training programs that direct to elderly care or even disabled care to our children. It not only gives that information, but when they grow up, they will look back and say that I know how, I remember that I did this, I did that. It's very important, because I think for us, we grow actually not knowing actually what programs we attend in school, but we attend it anyway, sometimes being forced. But I think it builds that character as you go along. And thirdly, I think the government can do so much. I think when you say that you self-quote for the government, I think government is doing so much. I think they can only do to a certain level of policy changes. All right. At the end of the day, or even sometimes, use the public money to spend on. But the other thing is for us, to do our part. All right. And not only know what the government does, I think many of us do not know what the government do, short of always criticizing. But I think we should know the reason behind the policies. And I think to the government also, we need to make it easy for everyone to understand the policies, behind all this complicated discussion about how the policies are being made and so on and so forth, and to bring it down to the level of at every level of society, the professionals, the laymen, as well as the children. I think that is very important.
Yep, I think that was a very interesting discussion, and thank you, Dr. Chen Yeow, for sharing all that with us. And we hope that your dream of a more caring society does come true. I'm sure you will continue to propagate this message, and try to influence win over the minds and hearts of people at all levels, so that yes, we see this in a new light, that it's not just a burden, but it's actually maybe in some ways a privilege, because it's not just what you give. I think it's what you can receive in return, in terms of having more compassion, more empathetic, and you become a better person, and you actually make society better as a whole, because people's hearts and minds are changed. So thank you very much. And I think that to answer the question, who should care? I think the answer is everybody, everybody. And yeah, I think we also should not just outsource it to our domestic helpers, who, like you said rightly, they're not trained to do that. And they didn't come here expecting to do that. Although I know some domestic helpers are actually qualified nurses, but that doesn't mean that, you can use them in this way. They're not qualified car washers, but some employers use them to wash their cars and all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that's a different subject altogether. So let's look up for it. My own parents are getting old, and I'm also thinking about this already. I said, if I do need to take care of one of them, probably not two, what kind of changes in my life do I need to make? And am I ready? Are my children ready? Is my wife ready for it? And things like that. So yeah, a very important subject, and I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to talk about it today.
And
So-
Paksan, talking about holistic care, I mean, just to remind, I did this method in which I think the word care itself can be, neutral, right? But if you can use this acronym SEMP, when we talk about caring our elderly, I mean, spiritual, emotional, mental, and physical. I mean, a professional caregiver can give the physical and even to a certain extent mental, care. But the first two, the spiritual care, that means as you go old, you want to stay close to what you believe in, and it's good for them to be around people who have the same faith, have the same emotional memories, and so on and so forth. I think that you cannot, get other people or pay other people to do it.
Yes.
That's true.
Anyway, thank you,
Okay.
Dr. Chan.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Thank you,
Thank you
Hassan.
very much,
Thank you,
Dr.
very
Chan.
informative.
Yeah. Have a good day.
Yeah.
All the
Have a good
best.
day.
Thank you.